Question 1. Governance review demonstrates that the Anaheim Police Department is investigating a series of burglaries. During the investigation, officers develop a strong suspicion that evidence related to these crimes is located within a private residence. What is the most appropriate and legally sound approach for the Anaheim Police Department to take in gathering this potential evidence, adhering to California's legal framework? Option A. Wait indefinitely to gather more information, even if probable cause is already established. Option B. Seek consent to search from a neighbor who occasionally visits the residence. Option C. Conduct a search based on the officer's strong suspicion alone. Option D. Obtain a search warrant based on probable cause established through thorough investigation. The correct answer is D. Obtain a search warrant based on probable cause established through thorough investigation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual privacy and ensure due process. The Anaheim Police Department, like any law enforcement agency in California, operates under strict legal frameworks governing evidence collection and the use of information. Misjudging the appropriate approach can lead to the suppression of crucial evidence, civil liability, and damage to public trust. The pressure to solve a crime quickly can sometimes create a temptation to bypass established procedures, making careful judgment paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a search warrant based on probable cause. This approach is correct because it aligns directly with the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, as interpreted and applied in California law. A search warrant ensures that any intrusion into an individual's privacy is judicially authorized and based on a sworn statement, demonstrating probable cause that evidence of a crime will be found. This process protects individual rights while providing law enforcement with a legally sound method to gather necessary information. The California Penal Code further outlines the requirements for obtaining and executing search warrants, reinforcing this as the mandated procedure for most searches of private property. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on the consent of a third party who is not the owner or lawful occupant of the premises. While consent can sometimes waive Fourth Amendment protections, consent from a third party is generally only valid if that person has common authority over the premises or if the officer reasonably believes they do. Without such authority, evidence obtained through this consent may be deemed inadmissible. This fails to meet the constitutional standard for a lawful search. Another incorrect approach is to conduct a search based on a mere suspicion or a hunch, without any articulable facts supporting probable cause. Fourth Amendment explicitly requires probable cause for the issuance of a warrant, and in many circumstances, for warrantless searches. Acting on suspicion alone violates fundamental constitutional rights and would render any evidence obtained inadmissible in court. A third incorrect approach is to delay the investigation indefinitely until a warrant can be obtained, even when exigent circumstances are not present. While warrants are preferred, an unreasonable delay in seeking one when probable cause exists can be problematic. However, the primary failure here is not in seeking the warrant, but in the implication that any delay without exigent circumstances is inherently wrong, when the correct procedure is to obtain the warrant. The more significant failure is in not pursuing the legally sanctioned method of obtaining evidence when probable cause is established. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the objective, to gather evidence related to a crime. 2. Assessing the legal landscape, understanding the constitutional protections, Fourth Amendment and relevant state laws, California Penal Code, governing searches and seizures. 3. Evaluating the available information, determining if probable cause exists to justify a search. 4. Selecting the appropriate legal tool. If probable cause exists, the primary tool is a search warrant. 5. Considering exceptions. If probable cause exists but a warrant is not feasible due to exigent circumstances, then those specific exceptions must be carefully documented and justified. 6. Documenting the process. Meticulously recording all steps taken, justifications, and evidence gathered to ensure transparency and legal defensibility. Question 2. Compliance review shows that the Anaheim Police Department needs to enhance its approach to identifying and prioritizing potential threats to community safety. Which of the following methodologies represents the most effective and professionally sound approach to risk assessment for the department? Option A. Focusing risk assessment efforts exclusively on crimes that have recently received significant media attention or public outcry. Option B. Relying primarily on historical crime statistics from the past decade to identify areas and types of crime that have historically been problematic. Option C. Developing risk assessment criteria based on the personal experience and intuition of senior command staff regarding potential threats. Option D. Implementing a systematic, data-driven framework that identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes threats based on likelihood and impact, incorporating intelligence, crime trends, and resource constraints. The correct answer is D. Implementing a systematic, data-driven framework that identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes threats based on likelihood and impact, incorporating intelligence, crime trends, and resource constraints. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for thorough risk assessment with the practical constraints of limited resources and time. The Anaheim Police Department, like any law enforcement agency, must prioritize its efforts to maximize effectiveness and public safety. A failure to conduct a proper risk assessment could lead to misallocation of resources, overlooking critical threats, or an inadequate response to emerging dangers within the community. The core of the challenge lies in developing a systematic and objective method for evaluating potential risks that is both comprehensive and actionable. The best approach involves a structured, data-driven methodology that systematically identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes potential threats based on their likelihood and potential impact. This includes considering various factors such as crime trends, community demographics, intelligence reports, and resource availability. By using a framework that quantifies or categorizes risks, the department can make informed decisions about where to allocate personnel, training, and equipment. This aligns with the principles of effective public safety management, which emphasizes proactive problem-solving and evidence-based policing. Such a systematic approach ensures that decisions are not based on anecdotal evidence or personal bias, but on a robust evaluation of the operational environment. An approach that relies solely on historical crime data without considering emerging trends or intelligence is flawed, because it may fail to anticipate new or evolving threats. This can lead to a reactive rather than proactive stance, leaving the department unprepared for novel criminal activities or community safety issues. Similarly, an approach that prioritizes high-visibility crimes over less apparent but potentially more damaging risks, such as cyber threats or organized crime infiltration, is incomplete. It risks overlooking threats that, while not always in the public eye, can have significant long-term consequences for public safety and departmental integrity. Finally, an approach that is overly influenced by political pressure or public perception without a solid analytical foundation is professionally unsound. Decisions must be grounded in objective risk assessment, not solely on what appears most urgent or popular at a given moment, to ensure equitable and effective resource deployment. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with defining the scope and objectives of the risk assessment. This should be followed by systematic data collection from diverse sources, including internal records, external intelligence, and community feedback. The collected data must then be analyzed using established methodologies to identify and evaluate risks. Prioritization should be based on a clear understanding of likelihood and impact, and the results should inform strategic planning, resource allocation, and operational deployment. Regular review and adaptation of the risk assessment process are crucial to maintain its relevance and effectiveness in a dynamic environment. Question 3. Governance review demonstrates that the Anaheim Police Department is seeking to refine its approach to prioritizing reported community concerns. Which of the following methods for assessing and prioritizing these concerns best aligns with principles of effective public service and risk management? Option A. Focus exclusively on concerns that have a high probability of immediate, visible resolution. Option B. Defer all prioritization decisions to the discretion of individual officers responding to the scene without a guiding framework. Option C. Implement a standardized risk assessment protocol that considers the potential for harm, likelihood of recurrence, availability of actionable intelligence, and impact on public safety and trust. Option D. Prioritize concerns based solely on the volume of complaints received for each issue. The correct answer is C. Implement a standardized risk assessment protocol that considers the potential for harm, likelihood of recurrence, availability of actionable intelligence, and impact on public safety and trust. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between maintaining public trust and the operational demands of law enforcement. The Anaheim Police Department, like any public service agency, must balance resource allocation with the imperative to address all reported concerns effectively. The chief's directive to prioritize based on potential impact, while seemingly pragmatic, risks overlooking critical community needs or creating a perception of bias if not handled with extreme care and transparency. The challenge lies in developing a risk assessment framework that is both operationally efficient and ethically sound, ensuring that all community concerns are treated with appropriate seriousness. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves establishing a standardized, multifaceted risk assessment protocol that considers a range of factors beyond immediate perceived severity. This protocol should incorporate objective criteria such as the potential for harm to individuals or the community, the likelihood of recurrence, the availability of actionable intelligence, and the potential impact on public safety and trust. This method is correct because it aligns with principles of fair and equitable service delivery, ensuring that decisions are data-driven and not solely reliant on subjective interpretations or immediate pressures. It promotes accountability by providing a clear framework for decision-making and allows for consistent application across different types of reported concerns. This systematic approach helps to mitigate bias and ensures that resources are directed where they are most needed, thereby upholding the department's commitment to serving all members of the Anaheim community. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely prioritize concerns based on the volume of complaints received. This method is flawed because high complaint volume does not always equate to the highest risk or greatest potential harm. A minor, recurring issue could generate numerous complaints, diverting resources from a more serious, less frequently reported concern. This approach fails to conduct a nuanced risk assessment and can lead to misallocation of resources, potentially neglecting more critical public safety issues. Another incorrect approach is to defer all prioritization decisions to the discretion of individual officers on the scene without a guiding framework. While officer discretion is important, relying solely on it without a standardized assessment process can lead to inconsistencies in how similar concerns are handled. This can result in perceptions of unfairness or bias within the community and does not ensure that departmental resources are being utilized in the most effective and strategic manner to address overall public safety risks in Anaheim. A third incorrect approach is to exclusively focus on concerns that have a high probability of immediate, visible resolution. This method is problematic, as it may overlook underlying systemic issues or concerns that require longer-term investigation and intervention. Prioritizing only easily solvable problems can lead to a superficial improvement in public perception without addressing the root causes of crime or disorder, ultimately failing to enhance long-term public safety and community well-being in Anaheim. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making process that begins with understanding the stated objective, efficient resource allocation based on risk. They should then evaluate each proposed approach against established principles of fairness, equity, effectiveness, and accountability. This involves asking, does this approach systematically consider all relevant factors? Does it minimize the potential for bias? Does it align with the department's mission to serve and protect all members of the community? The process should favor structured, objective methodologies that can be consistently applied and audited, rather than relying on subjective judgment or easily quantifiable but potentially misleading metrics. Question 4. Governance review demonstrates that the Anaheim Police Department is investigating a serious crime and requires access to sensitive digital data held by a private telecommunications provider in California. What is the most appropriate and legally sound approach for the department to obtain this information? Option A. Wait for the company to voluntarily provide the information without any proactive legal steps, hoping they will offer it due to the perceived urgency. Option B. Directly contact the private company and request the data, citing the urgency of the investigation. Option C. Rely on informal departmental policy or a supervisor's verbal directive to obtain the data, assuming the company will cooperate. Option D. Initiate a formal documented request for the data through established legal channels, such as a subpoena or search warrant, based on probable cause. The correct answer is D. Initiate a formal documented request for the data through established legal channels, such as a subpoena or search warrant, based on probable cause. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual privacy and due process. The Anaheim Police Department, like all law enforcement agencies in California, operates under strict legal frameworks governing evidence collection and the use of information obtained through various means. A hasty or improperly justified approach can lead to the suppression of evidence, civil liability, and damage to public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that all actions are lawful, ethical, and serve the interests of justice without infringing on fundamental rights. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves initiating a formal, documented request for the information through established legal channels, such as a subpoena or search warrant, based on probable cause. This approach is correct because it adheres to the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and the California Penal Code, which outlines the requirements for obtaining warrants and subpoenas. By seeking judicial authorization, the department demonstrates that its request is not arbitrary, but is supported by a legal basis, ensuring that any information obtained is admissible in court and respects the privacy rights of individuals. This process also provides a clear audit trail and accountability for the information gathered. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to directly contact the private company and request the data without a legal order, citing the urgency of the investigation. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses established legal procedures designed to protect privacy and prevent overreach. It could be construed as an unlawful search or seizure under the Fourth Amendment and California law, potentially leading to the exclusion of any obtained evidence and civil penalties against the department. Another incorrect approach is to rely on informal departmental policy or a supervisor's verbal directive to obtain the data, assuming the company will cooperate. This is flawed because it lacks the necessary legal foundation and documentation. Informal requests are not legally binding and do not provide the same level of protection or justification as a court-ordered process. It also creates a lack of accountability and can lead to inconsistent application of investigative practices. A third incorrect approach is to wait for the company to voluntarily provide the information without any proactive legal steps, hoping they will offer it due to the perceived urgency. While voluntary cooperation is ideal, it cannot be relied upon as a primary investigative strategy. Law enforcement has a duty to pursue all lawful avenues to gather evidence, and passively waiting for information without initiating the proper legal process is an abdication of that responsibility and could jeopardize the investigation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Identifying the objective and the information needed. 2. Assessing the legal requirements for obtaining that information, considering constitutional protections and relevant statutes, e.g., California Penal Code, federal laws. 3. Determining the appropriate legal mechanism, e.g., subpoena, search warrant, court order, based on the nature of the information and the privacy interests involved. 4. Documenting the justification for the request, including probable cause where required. 5. Executing the request through the proper legal channels and maintaining a clear record of all actions. This systematic approach ensures that investigations are conducted effectively, lawfully, and ethically. Question 5. The efficiency study reveals that certain Anaheim neighborhoods are experiencing a significant increase in reported property crimes, while other areas show a decrease. The department has limited resources for additional patrols, which approach best balances the need for immediate crime reduction with long-term community safety and departmental effectiveness. Option A. Maintain current patrol deployment levels across all neighborhoods, as historical data suggests a cyclical nature to crime rates. Option B. Reallocate resources to specialized units that have historically shown success in other jurisdictions, irrespective of current local crime trends or community needs. Option C. Conduct a detailed analysis of current crime data and community feedback in affected areas to identify specific crime patterns and resident concerns. Then strategically reallocate patrol resources and explore community-based prevention initiatives. Option D. Immediately increase uniformed patrol presence in the identified high-crime neighborhoods to deter further criminal activity, without further consultation. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed analysis of current crime data and community feedback in affected areas to identify specific crime patterns and resident concerns, then strategically reallocate patrol resources and explore community-based prevention initiatives. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential need to reallocate resources within the Anaheim Police Department to address rising crime rates in specific neighborhoods. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing competing demands for limited resources, ensuring equitable public safety, and maintaining officer morale, all while adhering to departmental policies and California state law regarding resource deployment and community policing. Careful judgment is required to avoid unintended negative consequences, such as neglecting other critical services or creating perceptions of bias. The most effective approach involves a data-driven assessment of crime trends and community needs, coupled with proactive engagement with affected residents and officers. This method prioritizes evidence-based decision-making, ensuring that resource allocation is directly responsive to identified risks and community concerns. It aligns with the ethical imperative to serve all members of the public effectively and equitably, and with California's emphasis on community-oriented policing strategies that foster trust and collaboration. This approach also allows for flexibility and adaptation based on ongoing feedback and evolving crime patterns, promoting a more responsive and accountable police service. An approach that solely focuses on increasing patrol presence in high-crime areas without considering community input or the underlying causes of crime is insufficient. This can lead to an over-policing of certain communities, potentially straining community relations, and failing to address the root issues contributing to criminal activity. May also overlook the need for specialized units or preventative programs that could be more effective in the long term. Another less effective approach would be to reallocate resources based on historical deployment patterns without a current assessment of crime data or community feedback. This fails to acknowledge that crime trends and community needs can change, leading to inefficient or inappropriate resource distribution. It risks perpetuating outdated strategies that are no longer relevant to the current public safety landscape. Finally, an approach that prioritizes resource allocation based on political pressure or anecdotal evidence, rather than objective data and community engagement, is professionally unsound. This can lead to decisions that are not in the best interest of public safety, may create perceptions of favoritism, and undermine the department's credibility and accountability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough analysis of available data, crime statistics, call-for-service data, community surveys. This should be followed by meaningful engagement with community stakeholders and departmental personnel to gather qualitative insights and build consensus. Finally, decisions should be implemented with clear objectives, measurable outcomes, and a plan for ongoing evaluation and adjustment. Question 6. The audit findings indicate a significant gap in the Anaheim Police Department's procedures for safeguarding sensitive informant data. Considering the potential for compromised investigations and harm to individuals, which of the following approaches best addresses the identified risk? Option A. Delegate the entire responsibility for informant risk assessment and data security to the discretion of individual investigative units, without establishing department-wide standards or oversight. Option B. Rely on existing, informal methods of informant data management, as these have historically sufficed for operational needs without significant incident. Option C. Prioritize the immediate operational utility of informant information, assuming that individual officers possess sufficient discretion to manage confidentiality risks on a case-by-case basis. Option D. Implement a comprehensive risk management strategy that includes rigorous data security protocols, regular officer training on informant, handling best practices, and strict guidelines for the secure storage and destruction of all informant-related records. Correct answer is D. Implement a comprehensive risk management strategy that includes rigorous data security protocols, regular officer training on informant handling best practices, and strict guidelines for the secure storage and destruction of all informant-related records. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential breakdown in the Anaheim Police Department's adherence to established risk assessment protocols, specifically concerning the handling of sensitive informant information. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for operational effectiveness with the long-term imperative of maintaining public trust and legal compliance. The department must ensure that its investigative methods are both efficient and ethically sound, minimizing the risk of compromising investigations or violating individuals' rights. A failure to properly assess and mitigate risks associated with informant handling can lead to compromised investigations, wrongful arrests, and significant legal repercussions for the department and the city of Anaheim. The most appropriate approach involves a comprehensive, multifaceted risk assessment that prioritizes the protection of informant identities and the integrity of the information provided. This entails a thorough review of existing policies and procedures for informant recruitment, management, and debriefing, identifying potential vulnerabilities. It requires implementing robust data security measures for all informant-related records, including encryption and access controls, and conducting regular training for officers on best practices for informant handling and the legal ramifications of breaches. Furthermore, this approach mandates the establishment of clear protocols for the secure storage and destruction of informant information, ensuring that data is retained only as long as necessary and is disposed of in a manner that prevents unauthorized access. This aligns with the fundamental ethical obligations of law enforcement to protect individuals and uphold the law, as well as the legal requirements for data privacy and due process. An approach that focuses solely on the immediate operational benefit of informant information, without adequately addressing the security and confidentiality risks, is professionally unacceptable. This would represent a failure to conduct a proper risk assessment, potentially leading to the exposure of informant identities, which could result in retaliation against the informant and the compromise of ongoing investigations. Such an approach neglects the critical ethical duty to protect those who assist law enforcement and the legal obligation to maintain the integrity of evidence and investigative processes. Another unacceptable approach would be to rely on outdated or informal methods for managing informant data, such as relying on verbal agreements or unencrypted digital files stored on unsecured devices. This demonstrates a disregard for modern data security standards and legal requirements for handling sensitive information. It creates an unacceptable level of risk for data breaches, identity theft, and the compromise of confidential information, undermining the credibility of the department and potentially exposing it to significant liability. Finally, an approach that delegates the responsibility for informant risk assessment to individual officers without standardized training or oversight is also professionally deficient. While individual officers may possess valuable experience, a lack of standardized procedures and consistent training can lead to a fragmented and inconsistent approach to risk management. This can result in varying levels of protection for informants and information across different units or investigations, creating systemic vulnerabilities that are difficult to identify and address. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a proactive and systematic approach to risk management. This begins with a clear understanding of the relevant legal and ethical frameworks governing law enforcement operations. It requires a commitment to continuous improvement, including regular reviews of policies and procedures, and investment in ongoing training for personnel. When faced with potential risks, professionals should engage in a thorough assessment process, identifying potential threats, evaluating their likelihood and impact, and developing and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies. This process should be documented and regularly reviewed to ensure its continued effectiveness. Question 7. Governance review demonstrates that the Anaheim Police Department is seeking to enhance its proactive approach to identifying potential public safety risks within the community. Considering the legal and ethical obligations of law enforcement in California, which of the following approaches to risk assessment would best align with established best practices and regulatory frameworks? Option A. Implementing a comprehensive risk assessment strategy that utilizes a combination of intelligence gathering, pattern analysis of crime data, and behavioral indicators, while strictly adhering to constitutional standards for reasonable suspicion and probable cause before any intrusive investigative actions are taken. Option B. Instituting broad, community-wide surveillance measures and data collection efforts in areas with a history of crime, without requiring specific intelligence or articulable suspicion linking those areas or their residents to current or emerging threats. Option C. Developing a risk assessment model that assigns higher threat levels to individuals or groups based on their ethnic background, religious affiliation, or perceived political leanings, regardless of any specific evidence of unlawful activity. Option D. Prioritizing the identification of potential risks based on prevailing community sentiments and anecdotal reports from informants, focusing on individuals or groups exhibiting behaviors that are perceived as unusual or out of place within specific neighborhoods. The correct answer is A. Implementing a comprehensive risk assessment strategy that utilizes a combination of intelligence gathering, pattern analysis of crime data, and behavioral indicators, while strictly adhering to constitutional standards for reasonable suspicion and probable cause before any intrusive investigative actions are taken. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between departmental efficiency goals and the imperative to conduct thorough, unbiased risk assessments. The pressure to quickly identify and address potential threats must be balanced against the risk of overreach, misallocation of resources, and the erosion of public trust if assessments are superficial or discriminatory. Careful judgment is required to ensure that risk assessment processes are both effective and ethically sound, adhering to the principles of fairness and due process. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a multifaceted risk assessment that considers a broad range of indicators and data points, prioritizing objective evidence and established threat assessment methodologies. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of evidence-based policing and the legal framework governing law enforcement in California. Specifically, it emphasizes the need for reasonable suspicion or probable cause, as defined by California law and relevant U.S. Supreme Court precedent, before initiating intrusive investigative actions. This method ensures that resources are directed towards credible threats, minimizes the risk of profiling, and upholds constitutional rights. It promotes a systematic and defensible process that can withstand scrutiny. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying primarily on anecdotal information and generalized community perceptions to identify potential risks. This is professionally unacceptable because it lacks objective evidentiary support, is prone to bias and stereotyping, and can lead to discriminatory practices, violating the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and California's anti-discrimination laws. It fails to establish the necessary legal threshold for investigation and can damage community relations. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on individuals or groups exhibiting certain demographic characteristics or engaging in lawful activities that are perceived as suspicious, without any concrete evidence of wrongdoing. This approach is ethically and legally flawed as it constitutes profiling, which is prohibited under California law and federal guidelines. It is not based on individualized suspicion and can lead to the harassment of innocent citizens, undermining the legitimacy of the police department. A further incorrect approach is to implement a blanket surveillance or intelligence-gathering strategy on entire communities based on generalized fears or past incidents, without specific intelligence linking those communities to current or imminent threats. This is a violation of privacy rights and can create a climate of fear and distrust. It is an inefficient use of resources and does not adhere to the principles of targeted, intelligence-led policing, which requires a demonstrable nexus between the subject of surveillance and a specific, articulable threat. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective data and established legal standards. This involves 1. Clearly defining the scope and purpose of the risk assessment. 2. Identifying all relevant sources of information, ensuring their reliability and objectivity. 3. Applying established threat assessment methodologies that are grounded in evidence and best practices. 4. Continuously evaluating the assessment process for potential biases and making adjustments as needed. 5. Ensuring that any subsequent actions taken are supported by the appropriate legal standard, e.g., reasonable suspicion, probable cause. 6. Maintaining transparency and accountability in the assessment process. Question 8. The control framework reveals a potential gap in the Anaheim Police Department's procedures for logging and transferring seized narcotics. An officer, responding to a high-volume arrest, has temporarily placed several bagged narcotics into a secondary, unlocked departmental locker in the patrol bay, intending to log them into the main evidence locker later that shift. This action was taken to free up space in their patrol vehicle. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the supervising officer to ensure compliance with California's evidentiary standards? Option A. Immediately retrieve the narcotics from the secondary locker, log their transfer to the main evidence locker with a supervisor present, and document the deviation from standard procedure in the officer's performance review. Option B. Instruct the officer to complete the standard evidence logging procedure as soon as their current priority task is finished, assuming the secondary locker is secure enough for a short period. Option C. Direct the officer to immediately secure the narcotics in their patrol vehicle and transport them directly to the main evidence locker, bypassing any intermediate storage. Option D. Advise the officer that while not ideal, the temporary placement is acceptable given the circumstances, and to ensure proper logging before the end of their shift. The correct answer is A. Immediately retrieve the narcotics from the secondary locker, log their transfer to the main evidence locker with a supervisor present, and document the deviation from standard procedure in the officer's performance review. Explanation: the control framework reveals a potential vulnerability in the Anaheim Police Department's evidence handling procedures. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need to process evidence with the absolute imperative of maintaining chain of custody and adhering to California Penal Code sections governing evidence integrity. A lapse in these procedures could compromise investigations, lead to inadmissible evidence, and erode public trust. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting every transfer and handling of evidence, ensuring that all personnel involved are properly trained, and that the evidence is stored in a secure, controlled environment. This approach aligns with California's strict evidentiary rules, which demand a clear and unbroken chain of custody to guarantee the authenticity and integrity of evidence presented in court. Adherence to these protocols is not merely procedural. It is a fundamental requirement for due process and the fair administration of justice within California. An incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed over meticulous documentation, such as allowing an officer to temporarily store evidence in their personal vehicle without a formal transfer log. This violates the principle of maintaining a verifiable chain of custody, as it introduces an uncontrolled element into the evidence's handling. Such a deviation creates a significant risk of evidence tampering, loss, or contamination, which could lead to the exclusion of critical evidence and potentially jeopardize criminal cases. Furthermore, it undermines the department's commitment to lawful and ethical evidence management, as mandated by state regulations. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to delegate evidence handling to personnel who have not received specific training in evidence management protocols. This can lead to unintentional errors in documentation, storage, or transfer, all of which can compromise the integrity of the evidence. California law and departmental policy require that only authorized and trained personnel handle evidence to ensure its admissibility and reliability. A third flawed approach involves overlooking minor discrepancies in the evidence log, assuming they are inconsequential. Even seemingly small omissions or errors in the chain of custody can be exploited by defense attorneys to challenge the evidence's reliability. Professional decision-making in evidence handling requires a commitment to absolute accuracy and completeness, recognizing that every detail in the documentation process is critical for upholding the integrity of the justice system. Professionals should employ a systematic review process for all evidence logs, cross-referencing entries, and immediately addressing any anomalies to ensure full compliance with California's evidentiary standards. Question 9. Analysis of a traffic stop in Anaheim, California, where an officer observes a driver exhibiting unusually rapid and erratic eye movements, coupled with a history of the driver's prior arrests for possession of controlled substances. What approach best balances the need for officer safety and constitutional protections when considering a pat-down for weapons? Option A. Detain the driver for an extended period to await the arrival of a K-9 unit to conduct a drug sniff, without further articulable suspicion of a weapon. Option B. Conduct a pat-down for weapons based on the driver's nervous eye movements and their prior arrest history for drug offenses. Option C. Immediately search the driver's vehicle and person without any specific indication of a weapon or ongoing criminal activity. Option D. Conduct a pat-down for weapons only if the officer can articulate specific, observable behaviors by the driver that suggest they are reaching for or concealing a weapon, or if there is information indicating the driver is currently armed and dangerous. The correct answer is D. Conduct a pat-down for weapons only if the officer can articulate specific, observable behaviors by the driver that suggest they are reaching for or concealing a weapon, or if there is information indicating the driver is currently armed and dangerous. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Anaheim Police Department officers by requiring them to balance the immediate need for information with the constitutional rights of an individual during a lawful stop. The officer must assess the risk of the individual fleeing or posing a danger without infringing upon the individual's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures. This requires a nuanced understanding of probable cause and reasonable suspicion, and the ability to make rapid, informed decisions under pressure. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the officer articulating specific, observable facts that create a reasonable suspicion that the individual is involved in criminal activity or poses a danger. This articulable suspicion must be more than a mere hunch or generalized fear. For example, if the individual is observed reaching into their waistband repeatedly in a manner consistent with concealing a weapon, or if the officer has reliable information that the individual is wanted for a violent crime, these would constitute specific facts supporting a lawful pat-down for weapons. This approach aligns with the Fourth Amendment's requirement for reasonable suspicion to justify a brief investigatory stop and frisk, as established in Terry v. Ohio. It respects individual liberties while allowing law enforcement to address potential threats. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to conduct a pat-down solely based on the individual's nervous demeanor or their presence in a high-crime area. While these factors might contribute to a broader assessment, they are generally insufficient on their own to establish reasonable suspicion for a frisk under California law and Fourth Amendment jurisprudence. Relying on such generalized observations risks violating the individual's constitutional rights by subjecting them to an unwarranted search. Another incorrect approach would be to detain the individual for an extended period without developing further reasonable suspicion or probable cause. Prolonged detention beyond what is necessary to confirm or dispel the initial suspicion can escalate into an unlawful seizure. The officer must act diligently to either conclude the stop or develop grounds for further action. A third incorrect approach would be to search the individual's person without any suspicion of criminal activity or danger, perhaps simply because the officer feels it is a good idea or to see what they have. This constitutes a search without any legal justification and is a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights while ensuring public safety. This involves 1. Identifying and articulating specific, objective facts that support a lawful basis for the stop and any subsequent search, reasonable suspicion for a frisk, probable cause for an arrest/search. 2. Continuously assessing the evolving situation to determine if the initial justification remains valid or if new information warrants a change in action. 3. Acting diligently and efficiently to minimize the intrusion on the individual's liberty. 4. Documenting all observations and actions thoroughly to provide a clear record of the justification for their conduct. Question 10. The review process indicates a need to project the potential financial impact of a new policy that would allow officers to volunteer for additional patrol shifts, which would be compensated at an overtime rate. Assuming the Anaheim Police Department operates under a standard 14-day work period for overtime calculation purposes, and that each officer's regular rate of pay is calculated to be $35.00 per hour, including all applicable compensation components. If an officer volunteers for and works an additional 20 hours of patrol duty within a 14-day work period, and has already worked 80 hours during that period, what is the total overtime compensation this officer would receive for these additional 20 hours, according to California and federal wage and hour laws? Option A, $1, 400, 00. Option B, $525, 00. Option C, $700, 00. Option D, $1, 050, 00. Correct answer is D. $1,050,00. Explanation. The review process indicates a need to assess the financial implications of a potential departmental policy change regarding overtime compensation for Anaheim Police Department officers. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a precise understanding of California labor law, specifically the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, as applied to public safety employees, and the ability to translate legal requirements into actionable financial projections. Misinterpreting overtime calculations can lead to significant financial liabilities for the department, including back pay, penalties, and legal fees, as well as potential morale issues among officers. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance and fiscal responsibility. The best approach involves accurately calculating the total potential overtime cost based on projected hours and the applicable overtime rates, considering the specific provisions of California law and the FLSA for police officers. This includes understanding the work period concept for overtime, which can be different for public safety employees, and ensuring that all compensable time, including certain pre- and post-shift activities if deemed work time, is factored in. The calculation should use the officer's regular rate of pay, which includes not just base salary, but also other forms of compensation that are part of the regular rate, and apply the statutory overtime multiplier, typically 1.5 times the regular rate for hours worked over 40 in a work week, or as defined by the applicable work period. This method ensures direct compliance with federal and state wage and hour laws, preventing underpayment and potential legal disputes. An incorrect approach would be to simply multiply projected overtime hours by the officer's base hourly rate, without considering the nuances of the regular rate of pay or the specific overtime provisions for public safety personnel. This fails to account for all components of the regular rate, leading to an underestimation of the true cost and a violation of wage and hour laws. Another incorrect approach would be to assume a standard 40-hour workweek overtime trigger without verifying if the department utilizes an alternative work period as permitted for public safety employees under the FLSA, which could lead to either overpayment or underpayment depending on the actual work schedule. A third incorrect approach would be to exclude certain types of paid time, such as court appearances or training, from overtime calculations, if such time is legally considered compensable work time under California law, thereby understating the total overtime liability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and accurate financial forecasting. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant legal frameworks, California Labor Code, FLSA, departmental policies. 2. Gathering all necessary data, officer salaries, projected overtime hours, definition of workweek/work period, components of regular rate of pay. 3. Performing calculations using appropriate formulas that reflect legal requirements. 4. Reviewing calculations with legal counsel or subject matter experts to ensure accuracy and compliance. 5. Documenting the methodology and assumptions used. Question 11. Performance analysis shows that during a sensitive investigation in Anaheim, California, officers have gathered preliminary information that could be of interest to community leaders concerned about public safety. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Anaheim Police Department officers to take regarding this information? Option A. Withhold all information from community leaders until the investigation is fully concluded and charges are filed, regardless of public safety implications. Option B. Immediately brief community leaders on the preliminary findings to foster transparency and address public concerns proactively. Option C. Formally document all gathered information and consult with departmental legal advisors and supervisors to determine the appropriate, legally permissible method and timing for sharing relevant, non-prejudicial information with community leaders, adhering strictly to California evidence handling and privacy laws. Option D. Share the preliminary information through informal social media channels to ensure broad and rapid dissemination to the public and community leaders. The correct answer is C. Formally document all gathered information and consult with departmental legal advisors and supervisors to determine the appropriate, legally permissible method and timing for sharing relevant, non-prejudicial information with community leaders, adhering strictly to California evidence handling and privacy laws. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual privacy and due process. Officers must act decisively, but also within the strict confines of California law and departmental policy regarding evidence handling and information dissemination. The risk of compromising an ongoing investigation or violating an individual's rights necessitates careful judgment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a structured approach that prioritizes legal compliance and investigative integrity. This means meticulously documenting all interactions and evidence, ensuring that any information obtained is handled in accordance with California Penal Code sections related to evidence preservation and disclosure. Specifically, officers must adhere to protocols that prevent unauthorized access or dissemination of sensitive information, thereby safeguarding the integrity of the investigation and respecting the rights of individuals involved. This approach ensures that all actions are legally defensible and ethically sound, minimizing the risk of legal challenges or internal disciplinary action. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately sharing preliminary findings with community leaders without proper vetting or authorization. This violates California law and departmental policy regarding the confidentiality of ongoing investigations and the protection of personal information. Such premature disclosure can jeopardize the investigation by alerting potential suspects, compromise the rights of individuals who may not be involved, and lead to public misinformation. Another incorrect approach is to delay any communication or information sharing with relevant stakeholders, even when it might be beneficial for public safety or community relations, without a clear investigative reason for the delay. While confidentiality is crucial, a complete lack of communication can erode public trust and hinder collaborative efforts that might otherwise support law enforcement objectives, provided such communication is carefully managed and legally permissible. A third incorrect approach is to rely on informal channels or personal discretion to disseminate information about the incident. This bypasses established protocols for evidence handling and information control, increasing the risk of inaccuracies, unauthorized disclosure, and potential legal ramifications under California statutes governing official records and privacy. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the legal and policy parameters governing the situation. This involves consulting relevant sections of the California Penal Code and departmental directives. Next, assess the potential risks and benefits of each course of action, considering the impact on the investigation, individual rights, and public trust. Prioritize actions that uphold legal and ethical standards, ensuring all information is handled through authorized channels and with appropriate documentation. When in doubt, seek guidance from supervisors or legal counsel. Question 12. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a high-impact event concerning an increase in organized retail theft in specific Anaheim commercial districts. Which of the following approaches best addresses this emerging threat? Option A. Develop and implement a targeted intelligence gathering operation focused on identifying key actors and patterns of this specific criminal activity, coupled with proactive community outreach to businesses in affected areas to share information and solicit cooperation. Option B. Significantly increase uniform patrol presence in all commercial districts, regardless of specific intelligence, to create a general deterrent effect. Option C. Establish a dedicated task force to respond exclusively to reported retail theft incidents as they occur, without a proactive intelligence component. Option D. Empower individual patrol officers to independently assess and respond to any perceived risks of retail theft within their assigned beats, without a coordinated departmental strategy. Correct answer is A. Develop and implement a targeted intelligence gathering operation focused on identifying key actors and patterns of this specific criminal activity, coupled with proactive community outreach to businesses in affected areas to share information and solicit cooperation. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a potential for a moderate likelihood of a high-impact event. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing resource allocation with the potential for significant harm to public safety and departmental reputation. A hasty, reactive approach could lead to wasted resources or an inadequate response, while an overly cautious approach might miss critical opportunities to mitigate risk. Careful judgment is required to select the most effective and efficient strategy. The best approach involves a proactive, intelligence-led strategy that prioritizes early intervention and community engagement. This method is correct because it aligns with the Anaheim Police Department's mandate to prevent crime and ensure public safety by addressing root causes and building trust. By gathering and analyzing intelligence, the department can identify emerging threats and allocate resources strategically to disrupt criminal activity before it escalates. This also fosters stronger community relationships, which are vital for intelligence gathering and crime prevention. Adhering to ethical principles of service and accountability. An approach that focuses solely on increased patrol presence without a clear intelligence-driven strategy is incorrect. While visible patrols can deter some crime, this reactive measure may not address underlying issues and could lead to inefficient resource deployment if not targeted effectively. It risks alienating communities if perceived as overly aggressive or disconnected from their concerns, potentially undermining trust and cooperation. An approach that relies entirely on responding to incidents as they occur, without any proactive risk assessment or intelligence gathering, is also incorrect. This reactive posture is inherently inefficient and places the department in a perpetual state of crisis management. It fails to meet the ethical obligation to proactively protect the public, and can lead to significant harm and loss due to delayed or insufficient responses. An approach that delegates all risk assessment and mitigation decisions to frontline officers without departmental oversight or a standardized framework is incorrect. While frontline officers possess valuable ground-level knowledge, a lack of centralized guidance and analysis can lead to inconsistent application of resources and potentially overlooked systemic risks. This undermines the department's ability to manage risk comprehensively and ethically. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the identified risks, considering both likelihood and impact. This should be followed by an evaluation of potential mitigation strategies, assessing their feasibility, effectiveness, and alignment with departmental values and legal obligations. The chosen strategy should be data-informed, prioritizing proactive measures and community collaboration, with clear lines of accountability and mechanisms for continuous evaluation and adaptation. Question 13. Investigation of a potential drug trafficking ring operating within Anaheim, California, has yielded intelligence suggesting a key facilitator is using encrypted communication devices. To gather further evidence, an Anaheim Police Department detective proposes initiating covert electronic surveillance of the facilitator's communications. What is the most appropriate risk assessment approach to ensure the investigation proceeds lawfully and ethically? Option A. Postpone any surveillance activities until absolute certainty of the facilitator's guilt is established, to avoid any potential legal challenges regarding privacy. Option B. Proceed with surveillance based on a general suspicion that the facilitator is involved in criminal activity, without needing specific, articulable facts to justify the intrusion. Option C. Initiate covert electronic surveillance immediately based on the supervisor's directive, as the urgency of the investigation outweighs the need for formal legal authorization in the initial stages. Option D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment that includes documenting all available intelligence to establish probable cause, consulting with supervisors and the district attorney's office to determine the legal requirements for obtaining a warrant or court order for surveillance, and clearly defining the scope and duration of the proposed surveillance. Correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough risk assessment that includes documenting all available intelligence to establish probable cause, consulting with supervisors and the district attorney's office to determine the legal requirements for obtaining a warrant or court order for surveillance, and clearly defining the scope and duration of the proposed surveillance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Anaheim Police Department officers due to the inherent tension between the need to gather intelligence for ongoing investigations and the imperative to respect individual privacy rights and avoid potential entrapment. The rapid development of information and the pressure to act quickly can lead to hasty decisions that may compromise investigative integrity or violate legal standards. Careful judgment is required to balance proactive policing with constitutional protections. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a structured approach to risk assessment that prioritizes obtaining necessary legal authorization before engaging in intrusive surveillance. This means meticulously documenting the probable cause for any surveillance, consulting with supervisors, and potentially the district attorney's office to ensure the proposed actions meet the legal threshold for a warrant or other court order, and clearly defining the scope and duration of the surveillance. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and California Penal Code sections governing search warrants and electronic surveillance. By seeking legal authorization, officers demonstrate due diligence, ensure the evidence gathered is admissible, and uphold the public trust by operating within established legal boundaries. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with covert surveillance based solely on a supervisor's verbal directive, without documented probable cause or a formal warrant application. This is ethically and legally flawed as it bypasses the judicial oversight designed to protect individual liberties. It risks the evidence being deemed inadmissible in court and exposes the department to civil liability. Another incorrect approach is to initiate surveillance based on generalized suspicion or a hunch, without specific, articulable facts linking the target to criminal activity. This constitutes a fishing expedition and violates the probable cause standard required for lawful surveillance under U.S. law. It is an abuse of police power and erodes public confidence. A third incorrect approach is to delay surveillance indefinitely due to an overly cautious interpretation of privacy rights, even when probable cause exists and a warrant could likely be obtained. While respecting privacy is crucial, failing to pursue legitimate investigative leads when legally permissible can hinder the effective administration of justice and allow criminal activity to persist unchecked. This approach fails to balance investigative necessity with legal protections. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the investigative objective. They must then assess the available information against the legal standards for probable cause. If probable cause exists, the next step is to consult with legal counsel or supervisors to determine the appropriate legal mechanism for surveillance, e.g., warrant, court order. All actions must be meticulously documented, and officers should be prepared to articulate the factual basis for their decisions. This systematic process ensures that investigative actions are both effective and lawful, safeguarding both public safety and individual rights. Question 14. Comparative studies suggest that effective law enforcement in California requires a delicate balance between proactive policing and strict adherence to constitutional rights. An Anaheim Police Department officer observes an individual loitering in a high-crime area known for drug activity, exhibiting nervous behavior. The officer approaches the individual, asks for identification, and without further articulable suspicion beyond the loitering and nervousness, asks to search the individual's backpack. The individual refuses. The officer then orders the individual to open the backpack, stating that failure to comply will be considered obstruction. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer, considering California law and departmental policy? Option A. Detain the individual based on the perceived obstruction and conduct a search of the backpack to ensure public safety. Option B. Immediately arrest the individual for obstruction of justice and conduct a search of the backpack as incident to arrest. Option C. Respect the individual's refusal to consent to the search, cease the interaction regarding the backpack search, and continue to observe the individual from a distance if warranted by the initial observations, documenting the encounter. Option D. Proceed with a search of the backpack, citing the high crime area and the individual's nervous behavior as sufficient justification for a warrantless search. The correct answer is C. Respect the individual's refusal to consent to the search, cease the interaction regarding the backpack search, and continue to observe the individual from a distance if warranted by the initial observations, documenting the encounter. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action to protect public safety and the imperative to adhere strictly to established legal procedures and evidentiary standards. Officers must exercise sound judgment to balance these competing demands, ensuring that their actions are both effective and legally defensible within the framework of California law. The potential for misinterpretation of evidence or overreach in investigative tactics necessitates a meticulous and procedurally sound approach. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting all observations and actions, clearly articulating the probable cause for any stops or searches, and ensuring that any evidence obtained is collected and preserved in a manner that maintains its integrity and admissibility in court. This approach aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and California Penal Code sections governing search and seizure, emphasizing the requirement for warrants based on probable cause or well-defined exceptions. By adhering to these principles, officers uphold constitutional rights, ensure the reliability of evidence, and contribute to the fair administration of justice in California. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves making assumptions about an individual's guilt based on generalized observations or stereotypes, leading to stops or searches without specific, articulable facts constituting probable cause or reasonable suspicion. This violates the principles of due process and equal protection, potentially leading to unlawful detentions and the suppression of evidence. Another incorrect approach is to conduct searches without a warrant or a recognized exception, such as consent or exigent circumstances, and then attempt to retroactively justify the search based on findings. This circumvents the established legal safeguards designed to prevent arbitrary government intrusion and undermines the integrity of the investigative process. A further incorrect approach is to fail to properly document the chain of custody for seized evidence, or to handle evidence in a way that compromises its integrity. This can render the evidence inadmissible in court, hindering prosecution, and potentially allowing individuals who have committed offenses to escape accountability due to procedural errors. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal statutes and constitutional protections. This involves a continuous assessment of the facts against established legal standards for stops, searches, and evidence collection. When in doubt, consulting with supervisors or legal counsel is paramount to ensure actions are procedurally sound and legally compliant within the jurisdiction of California. Question 15. The investigation demonstrates that during a high-speed pursuit of a suspect in Anaheim, California, officers located a small, unmarked package dropped by the suspect. The package appears to contain a controlled substance. Officer Miller, concerned about the suspect escaping and the potential for the package to be lost or tampered with, immediately picks up the package and places it in his patrol car's trunk for safekeeping until the pursuit concludes. Which of the following actions best reflects proper procedure for Officer Miller in this situation? Option A. Immediately secure the package and notify dispatch to alert a supervisor and the evidence custodian to the discovery and location of the evidence, requesting their immediate presence or guidance. Option B. Place the package in his personal locker at the station for safekeeping until the pursuit is over and he can properly process it. Option C. Open the package to visually confirm its contents and then place it in his patrol car's trunk for safekeeping. Option D. Leave the package at the scene where it was dropped and continue the pursuit of the suspect, assuming it will be recovered later by a specialized unit. The correct answer is A. Immediately secure the package and notify dispatch to alert a supervisor and the evidence custodian to the discovery and location of the evidence, requesting their immediate presence or guidance. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a complex scenario involving potential evidence tampering and a breach of established police protocols within the Anaheim Police Department. The professional challenge lies in balancing the urgency of securing potentially crucial evidence with the imperative to adhere strictly to departmental policies and legal standards governing evidence handling. Failure to do so can compromise the integrity of the investigation, lead to the exclusion of vital evidence in court, and result in disciplinary action against the officers involved. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands. The approach that represents best professional practice involves immediately securing the scene and notifying the appropriate evidence custodian or supervisor as per Anaheim Police Department policy. This ensures that the evidence is handled by trained personnel in a manner that maintains its chain of custody and admissibility. This approach is correct because it prioritizes both the preservation of evidence and adherence to established legal and departmental procedures. The California Evidence Code and the Anaheim Police Department's general orders mandate specific protocols for evidence collection, handling, and storage to prevent contamination, loss, or tampering, thereby safeguarding the integrity of the judicial process. An incorrect approach involves an officer, without proper authorization or training in evidence handling, attempting to collect and store the evidence in their personal locker. This is professionally unacceptable, as it bypasses the designated evidence control unit, potentially breaks the chain of custody, and introduces a significant risk of evidence contamination or compromise. This violates Anaheim Police Department's general orders regarding evidence management and the California Evidence Code's requirements for maintaining the integrity of evidence. Another incorrect approach is to leave the evidence unsecured at the scene while continuing the immediate pursuit of the suspect. While the pursuit is a priority, abandoning potentially critical evidence without proper safeguarding or notification is a serious oversight. This risks the evidence being lost, damaged, or tampered with by unauthorized individuals, thereby jeopardizing the investigation. This fails to meet the departmental duty to preserve all relevant evidence. A further incorrect approach is to discuss the nature of the evidence with the suspect before securing it. This is ethically and legally problematic, as it could alert the suspect to the strength of the case against them, potentially leading to further attempts to obstruct justice or dispose of other evidence. It also violates the principle of maintaining a neutral and objective investigation. The professional reasoning framework that should be applied in such situations involves a clear understanding and strict adherence to departmental policies and relevant legal statutes. When faced with a situation where evidence is discovered, officers must prioritize its immediate and proper securing and documentation according to established protocols. If there is any doubt about the correct procedure, officers should err on the side of caution and seek guidance from a supervisor or the evidence custodian. The integrity of the investigation and the admissibility of evidence are paramount, and these are best protected by following established procedures meticulously. Question 16. Assessment of proper evidence handling procedures by an Anaheim Police Department officer discovering a suspected illegal firearm during a traffic stop in Anaheim, California. Option A. Seize the firearm immediately for processing, then return to the scene to document its original location and any surrounding conditions. Option B. Photograph the firearm in its exact location, note environmental conditions, carefully collect it using gloves and appropriate packaging, and immediately begin the chain of custody documentation. Option C. Place the firearm in the patrol vehicle's glove compartment for later processing to avoid drawing attention at the scene. Option D. Ask a civilian witness to hold onto the firearm until the officer can complete other duties. The correct answer is B. Photograph the firearm in its exact location, note environmental conditions, carefully collect it using gloves and appropriate packaging, and immediately begin the chain of custody documentation. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for Anaheim Police Department officers regarding the proper handling of evidence in a potential felony case. The challenge lies in balancing the urgency of securing evidence with the strict legal requirements for its collection and preservation, particularly concerning chain of custody and potential contamination. Failure to adhere to these protocols can lead to the exclusion of crucial evidence, jeopardizing the prosecution and undermining public trust in law enforcement. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting the discovery of the firearm, its condition, and its exact location before any collection occurs. This includes photographing the scene with the firearm in situ, noting any immediate environmental factors, and then carefully collecting it using appropriate protective measures, e.g., gloves, evidence bags, to prevent contamination and preserve its integrity. The officer must then immediately initiate the chain of custody by logging the evidence with all required details, ensuring a clear and unbroken record of its handling from the point of discovery to its secure storage. This approach directly aligns with California Penal Code sections governing evidence preservation and the fundamental principles of due process, ensuring the evidence is admissible in court and its integrity is beyond reproach. Incorrect approaches analysis. Seizing the firearm immediately without any documentation or scene preservation, and then attempting to reconstruct the scene later, risks significant chain of custody breaches and potential contamination. This failure to document the initial discovery location and condition can lead to challenges regarding the evidence's relevance and reliability, potentially violating California Evidence Code provisions related to the admissibility of evidence. Placing the firearm in a personal vehicle's glove compartment without proper evidence packaging or immediate logging, even with the intent to process it later, introduces a high risk of contamination and unauthorized access. This deviates from standard operating procedures for evidence handling and compromises the chain of custody, making the evidence vulnerable to legal challenges under California law. Handing the firearm directly to a civilian witness for safekeeping, even if they appear trustworthy, is a severe breach of protocol. This bypasses the established chain of custody entirely, introduces an unknown element into the evidence handling process, and creates an unacceptable risk of tampering or loss, rendering the evidence inadmissible under California Penal Code. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic approach to evidence handling. This involves 1. Recognizing the evidentiary value of an item. 2. Securing the scene to prevent contamination or alteration. 3. Meticulously documenting the item's location, condition, and surrounding environment through notes and photography. 4. Carefully collecting and packaging the item using appropriate materials and techniques to maintain its integrity. 5. Initiating and diligently maintaining the chain of custody from the moment of collection. This structured process ensures legal compliance and upholds the integrity of the justice system. Question 17. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need for greater transparency regarding police activity. A member of the public in Anaheim, California, submits a request under the California Public Records Act, CPRA, for documents related to a recently concluded high-profile investigation. The request is broad and could potentially include sensitive details about investigative techniques, witness identities, and internal deliberative processes. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Anaheim Police Department to take in responding to this request? Option A. Immediately deny the entire request, citing the general need to protect the integrity of past investigations and prevent the compromise of investigative methods. Option B. Acknowledge receipt of the request but delay providing a substantive response indefinitely, stating that the department is too busy with active cases to process such requests promptly. Option C. Release all requested documents without any review, assuming that all information requested by the public must be disclosed under the CPRA. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the requested documents, identifying any information that falls under specific CPRA exemptions, consulting with legal counsel, and providing a response that either discloses the non-exempt information or provides a legally justified denial for exempt portions. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review of the requested documents, identifying any information that falls under specific CPRA exemptions, consulting with legal counsel, and providing a response that either discloses the non-exempt information or provides a legally justified denial for exempt portions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between departmental efficiency and the public's right to access information, particularly when that information could potentially impact ongoing investigations or individual privacy. Balancing these competing interests requires a nuanced understanding of California Public Records Act, CPRA, principles and departmental policy, demanding careful judgment to avoid both overdisclosure and undue obstruction. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough review of the request against CPRA exemptions and departmental policy. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal requirements of the CPRA, which mandates disclosure unless a specific exemption applies. By consulting legal counsel and relevant departmental guidelines, officers ensure that any denial or redaction is legally defensible and ethically sound, protecting both the public's right to know and the integrity of ongoing investigations or sensitive information. This aligns with the principle of transparency while upholding necessary confidentiality. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately deny the request based on a general concern about ongoing investigations. This fails to comply with the CPRA, which requires specific justification for withholding information. A blanket denial without a detailed review of applicable exemptions is legally insufficient and undermines public trust. Another incorrect approach is to provide all requested information without any review, assuming that all public records must be disclosed. This is problematic as it ignores the explicit exemptions provided within the CPRA, such as those protecting the identity of confidential informants, ongoing investigation details that could compromise effectiveness, or personal information that would constitute an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. Such an approach could jeopardize investigations and violate privacy rights. A third incorrect approach is to delay a response indefinitely without acknowledging receipt or providing a timeline for review. This is a failure to adhere to the CPRA procedural requirements for responding to public records requests and can be interpreted as an attempt to obstruct access to information, leading to potential legal challenges and damage to the department's reputation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach public records requests by first acknowledging receipt and understanding the scope of the request. They should then consult the relevant statutes, in this case, the California Public Records Act, and departmental policies to identify any potential exemptions that might apply. If exemptions are considered, consultation with legal counsel is paramount to ensure proper application and to draft a legally sound response, whether it be full disclosure, partial disclosure with redactions, or a justified denial. This systematic process ensures compliance, protects sensitive information, and maintains public confidence. Question 18. Regulatory review indicates that officers of the Anaheim Police Department have received an anonymous tip alleging that a specific individual is selling narcotics from a blue sedan parked in a public park. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officers to take to ensure compliance with constitutional search and seizure requirements? Option A. Approach the individual and ask for consent to search the vehicle, explaining that they received a tip. Option B. Immediately stop and search the individual and the vehicle based solely on the anonymous tip. Option C. Detain the individual and the vehicle based on the anonymous tip and wait for the informant to provide further details. Option D. Conduct surveillance of the area to observe the described vehicle and the individual, looking for any corroborating evidence of criminal activity before taking further action. The correct answer is D. Conduct surveillance of the area to observe the described vehicle and the individual, looking for any corroborating evidence of criminal activity before taking further action. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Anaheim, California, involving the potential for a search based on an informant's tip. The professional challenge lies in balancing the need to investigate potential criminal activity with the constitutional rights of individuals, specifically the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. Officers must exercise careful judgment to ensure that any search is conducted with probable cause, supported by reliable information, and not based on mere suspicion or uncorroborated hearsay. The Anaheim Police Department's policies and procedures, aligned with California law and U.S. constitutional principles, dictate the standards for initiating such searches. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough corroboration of the informant's tip before initiating a search. This approach requires officers to independently verify the details provided by the informant through their own observations or other reliable sources. For instance, if the informant states a specific vehicle will be at a certain location at a particular time, officers should attempt to observe that vehicle at that location. This corroboration helps establish the informant's reliability and the veracity of the information, thereby building probable cause. This aligns with established legal precedent, such as Illinois v. Gates, which allows for a totality of the circumstances analysis when determining probable cause, emphasizing the importance of corroboration. Ethically, this approach upholds the principle of respecting individual rights and preventing arbitrary intrusions. Incorrect approaches analysis. Initiating a search solely based on an anonymous tip without any independent corroboration is professionally unacceptable. This approach fails to establish the reliability of the informant or the accuracy of the information, thus lacking the necessary probable cause required by the Fourth Amendment. Such actions could lead to unlawful searches and seizures, violating constitutional rights and potentially leading to the suppression of evidence. Conducting a stop and frisk based on the informant's tip without any observable suspicious behavior by the individual is also professionally unacceptable. While a stop and frisk can be permissible under certain circumstances, Terry v. Ohio, it requires reasonable suspicion that criminal activity is afoot and that the person is armed and dangerous. An informant's tip alone, without further observation or corroboration, does not typically meet this standard. Relying on the informant's past reliability as the sole justification for a search, without corroborating the current tip, is also professionally unsound. While an informant's track record is a factor in assessing reliability, each tip must be evaluated on its own merits. If the current information is vague or uncorroborated, past reliability alone may not be sufficient to establish probable cause for a specific search. Professional reasoning. professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves a systematic evaluation of information. 1. Assess the source of the information. Is it anonymous, a known informant with a track record, or a victim? 2. Corroborate details. Independently verify as many details of the tip as possible through observation or other reliable means. 3. Evaluate the totality of the circumstances. Consider all available information, including the informant's reliability, the specificity of the tip, and any corroborating evidence, to determine if probable cause exists. 4. Consult with supervisors or legal counsel when in doubt. 5. Document all actions and the reasoning behind them meticulously. Question 19. Consider a scenario where Anaheim Police Department officers have lawfully stopped a vehicle for a minor traffic violation. During the interaction, an officer develops a gut feeling that the occupants might be involved in a recent string of burglaries in the area, but they cannot articulate specific facts or observations to support probable cause for a search of the vehicle. What is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the officers to take regarding a search of the vehicle? Option A. Inform the driver of the reason for the stop. Explain the officer's suspicion regarding potential involvement in recent burglaries, and request explicit consent to search the vehicle. Option B. Conduct a search of the vehicle based on the officer's gut feeling and the general knowledge of recent burglaries in the area. Option C. Proceed with a search of the vehicle after the driver expresses reluctance or refuses consent, citing the need to investigate potential criminal activity. Option D. Detain the occupants for an extended period while awaiting a K-9 unit, hoping the dog will alert to something, without any prior articulable suspicion of drug or contraband possession. The correct answer is A. Inform the driver of the reason for the stop, explain the officer's suspicion regarding potential involvement in recent burglaries, and request explicit consent to search the vehicle. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the immediate need to secure evidence and the imperative to uphold individual rights and departmental policy. Officers must exercise sound judgment to balance effective law enforcement with constitutional protections and procedural fairness. Failure to do so can lead to compromised investigations, legal challenges, and damage to public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves officers clearly articulating their probable cause for the stop to the driver, informing them of the reason for the search, and obtaining explicit consent before proceeding with the vehicle search. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, requiring probable cause or consent for a lawful search. By obtaining consent, officers create a legally sound basis for the search, minimizing the risk of evidence suppression and ensuring adherence to due process. This method respects the individual's rights while still allowing for a thorough investigation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves officers conducting a search of the vehicle based solely on a vague suspicion that the driver might be involved in criminal activity, without articulating specific facts that would constitute probable cause. This violates the Fourth Amendment's requirement for probable cause, as mere suspicion is insufficient for a lawful search. Another incorrect approach involves officers proceeding with a search after the driver explicitly refuses consent, relying on the argument that they had a hunch. This directly contravenes the driver's right to refuse consent and constitutes an unlawful search, rendering any evidence obtained inadmissible. A further incorrect approach involves officers conducting a search based on a departmental policy that allows for random vehicle searches without any individualized suspicion or probable cause. Such a policy would likely be unconstitutional, as it infringes upon the protections guaranteed by the Fourth Amendment. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and established legal standards. This involves 1. Assessing the situation for articulable facts that support probable cause. 2. If probable cause is lacking, seeking voluntary and informed consent from the individual. 3. Clearly communicating the reasons for any stop or search to the individual. And 4. Meticulously documenting all actions and justifications. When in doubt, consulting with a supervisor or legal counsel is paramount. Question 20. Upon reviewing the Anaheim Police Department's overtime expenditure reports for the past fiscal year, it has become apparent that overtime costs have exceeded the allocated budget by 15%. the Chief of Police has tasked you with developing a strategy to manage this deficit for the remainder of the current fiscal year and to prevent recurrence in the next. Considering the operational demands and the well-being of officers, which of the following approaches would be the most fiscally responsible and operationally sound? Option A. Approve all overtime requests as submitted by supervisors to maintain officer morale and ensure adequate coverage, and then request an emergency budget augmentation from the City Council to cover the deficit. Option B. Reallocate funds from the department's capital improvement budget for new patrol vehicles to cover the overtime shortfall. Option C. Immediately implement a strict freeze on all overtime, requiring all overtime requests to be personally approved by the Chief of Police, regardless of the nature of the request. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive analysis of overtime usage patterns to identify specific operational areas or times that contribute most significantly to overtime, and then propose targeted adjustments to staffing schedules, resource deployment, or operational procedures to mitigate these specific drivers, while also exploring opportunities for increased grant funding for specialized units that frequently incur overtime. Correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive analysis of overtime usage patterns to identify specific operational areas or times that contribute most significantly to overtime, and then propose targeted adjustments to staffing schedules, resource deployment, or operational procedures to mitigate these specific drivers, while also exploring opportunities for increased grant funding for specialized units that frequently incur overtime. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in law enforcement: resource allocation under pressure, specifically concerning overtime budgeting and its impact on operational readiness. The Anaheim Police Department, like any municipal agency, operates under strict budgetary constraints and must adhere to California government code and departmental policies regarding overtime expenditure. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate need for officer presence and investigative capacity with the long-term fiscal responsibility and the potential for burnout among officers. Careful judgment is required to ensure that overtime is utilized effectively, legally, and ethically, without compromising the department's overall mission or the well-being of its personnel. The approach that represents best professional practice involves a proactive, data-driven strategy for managing overtime. This includes a thorough analysis of historical overtime trends, identification of peak demand periods or recurring operational needs, and the development of a predictive model for future overtime requirements. Based on this analysis, a revised staffing model or operational plan can be proposed that aims to reduce reliance on overtime by optimizing regular duty assignments, potentially through strategic shift scheduling, or by reallocating personnel to high-demand areas. This approach is correct because it aligns with principles of fiscal prudence, operational efficiency, and officer welfare. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit of California Government Code Section 53,843, which encourages efficient use of public funds, and departmental policies that mandate responsible budget management. By seeking to reduce overtime through systemic improvements rather than simply cutting it arbitrarily, it demonstrates a commitment to maintaining service levels while addressing budgetary concerns. An incorrect approach would be to immediately implement a blanket freeze on all overtime without considering the operational impact. This fails to acknowledge the legitimate needs that often necessitate overtime, such as critical incident response, ongoing investigations, or mandated court appearances. Such an arbitrary freeze could lead to understaffing during crucial periods, potentially compromising public safety and the department's ability to effectively respond to emergencies, thereby violating the department's core duty to protect and serve. Another incorrect approach would be to approve all overtime requests without any oversight or justification, simply to avoid conflict or to maintain officer morale in the short term. This is professionally unacceptable as it disregards budgetary limitations and can lead to significant overspending, potentially jeopardizing the department's financial stability and its ability to fund other essential services. It also fails to address the underlying reasons for high overtime, such as chronic understaffing or inefficient workload distribution, and can contribute to officer burnout. A further incorrect approach would be to reallocate funds from essential equipment or training budgets to cover overtime shortfalls. This is a fiscally irresponsible and ethically questionable practice. It prioritizes immediate operational needs over long-term readiness and officer development, potentially creating future deficiencies in critical areas like equipment maintenance or officer skill enhancement, which could ultimately impact the department's effectiveness and safety. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a multifaceted approach. First, gather and analyze relevant data, including overtime expenditure trends, operational demands, and staffing levels. Second, consult with supervisors and officers to understand the root causes of overtime and potential solutions. Third, develop a range of options, evaluating each for its fiscal impact, operational consequences, and ethical implications. Fourth, present a well-reasoned proposal to departmental leadership, justifying the chosen course of action with data and adherence to relevant regulations and policies. Finally, continuously monitor the effectiveness of implemented strategies and be prepared to adapt as circumstances change.